Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Curious About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Brian Rothenberg. Today, I wanted to continue the discussion I've been having with you all regarding valuing Bitcoin treasury companies and trying to figure out the metrics that are going to be most useful for us as we try to figure out what allocation we want to make to different Bitcoin treasury companies. And so today, what I tried to do was put some numbers to this because one of the aspects of this whole investment thesis piece that I've been finding missing is kind of how much each dollar of investment is going to buy you, both in sort of the sats that you get initially, but also how much growth there's going to be there. And there are a number of metrics that have been put out by a number of different people out there, all of whom I thank for their contributions. There is BTC yield, there is, MNAV, there is MNAV months to cover, there is, what was the new one that Adam Livingston came out today? I think it was premium compression velocity. All of these metrics, but none of them were really looking at, if you put $1 into MSTR, how many, sats is that worth today? If you put $1 into MetaPlanet, how many sats is that worth? And then as they grow their stacks at different rates, what is that worth as well, right? So if we take a look at MetaPlanet's, end of the year goal, which I think is 30,000 Bitcoin, we could see Strategy add 30,000 more Bitcoin. Sorry, it would be 22, the difference between what they have today. 22, 21,000. We could see Strategy add that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, the way that they purchased in the past. So, those can't be apples to apples numbers. So I've been trying to figure out ways to put numbers on these things. So I'm going to share my screen and I will put in the show notes here the spreadsheet that I put together that kind of tries to compare these. And I don't just compare Strategy and MetaPlanet, I also include the blockchain group in this analysis as well. Putting in, starting share price, ending share price, assuming that this is, say, a 3 month or a 6 month period. I think I use 3 months for the, numbers down here for the MNAB months to cover and everything like that. But I may change that out to 6 months here, only because I think the end of the year numbers are kind of what I'm looking at here as we go through, changing some of these variables as I go. But as we kind of continue down, how much Bitcoin does each company have? How many shares have been issued? One thing that's really interesting, I think I pointed this out yesterday in various places, but MetaPlanet actually has more shares issued than Strategy does. But you can see, reflected in Strategy share price, the market cap of Strategy is going to dwarf that of MetaPlanet, although MetaPlanet is growing very fast. I don't mean to be throwing shade at any company in this analysis, but it's important that we try to figure out ways to kind of compare these things. And if you look at the starting sats per share, like, 185,000 to 1,100, right? I'll call it 185x. That's kind of ridiculous. Like, that's not the same league, but there's also, what is this compared to that? I think that's 40x multiple of, price and everything like that. So the first thing that I did was I divided this out by the number of, current shares issued and figure out how many sats do we have per share dollar. So if you put $1 into MSTR and you put $1 into MetaPlanet, you're going to get different portions of a share of stock out of that. What does that dollar represent in terms of sats? And you can kind of see those metrics here as we come down. And Strategy, you're going to get the most. Blockchain group, you're going to get the least. But you're also going to see that, blockchain group and MetaPlanet are closer to each other. To me, this has to matter, right? The starting place. If I were to think about, buying, a group of McDonald's franchises, right? And one was trading at, $100 stock price with 1,000 shares, and you had 10 McDonald's locations in there, and another one was trading at the same $100 with 1,000 shares, but it had 5. That would be a meaningful thing when I'm buying into that, right? Now, you'd have to look at the locations to see what was different about them and things like that. But, just the fact that one has 5 and one has 10, I don't want to invest in the one that's smaller because it has better growth potential, right? Yes, of course it does, but it also reflects other factors there. So as I kind of continued with this, I wanted to figure out, all right, what happens if we, raise shares. And I know MetaPlanet just announced a $5 billion plan. We could take a look at what happens to these other companies if they put in what they've said. So Strategy has their, 4242 plan at this point in time. So, putting in $21 billion is probably not out of the question before the end of the year. It might even be low. And I know that the blockchain group put in their plan for $10 billion of issuance, which is getting voted on this coming week. But you can kind of see what happens. Nothing so far happens to these numbers, but you see some different changes down here with the sets added per, diluted share and everything like that. How many shares you're going to buy as you, make those changes to the numbers, all of those types of things as we kind of come through. And so far, I've kept the price of both Bitcoin and the ending share price the same. Like there's no appreciation in that. But those are going to be other variables that are going to, impact this. And what we see is that, at the current share prices, at the current price of Bitcoin, with these, different numbers here, you're actually going to see for $5 billion more sats added per share with MetaPlanet and the blockchain group than you are with Strategy, right? You're going to see, the number of sats added per diluted share be very different, but it really depends on sort of the dollar values and things like that as well, I think. And I'm still trying to work this out in my head. But if you increase the prices of these, shares of stock based on, various projections. I haven't seen any projections for the blockchain group, but let's make it even rosier than what we see for MetaPlanet there in terms of growth. You can kind of see how that could also impact things, right? So the beginning, starting share dollars doesn't change, but the ending share dollars does. And that could be something where, with the bigger dollars raised, more shares issued, more Bitcoin purchased here, 4x basically what MetaPlanet is buying. That could be very, very interesting, and it could result in Strategy adding more sats per fully diluted share. And I think ultimately these things do matter. As we kind of continue down here, I threw in the other, MNAV multiples, the current BTC yield multiples, which I was just pulling from the last quarter, which I think was 18% yield and 226%. And I think they had forward looked. I think I calculated this for the end of the year based on 30,000 Bitcoin additional purchases, 2.38. And then I just did a bigger number over here. I might even do 5 just to show what that looks like. But you can kind of see that, the BTC yield multiple is going to be a really, really important factor for the premium compression velocity. And you would expect that the smaller the company, the bigger the premium compression velocity there. But what's interesting is, MNAV months to cover can be smaller for a larger company based on a lower MNAV if somebody's trading up and higher and everything like that. So, just different things that I've been trying to play with as we go through these numbers. Finally, the last thing that I kind of thought about was, all right, what does this all look like if we normalize things? What if we take all of the, shares here and we figure out how many shares you would have if each of these stocks today had the same market cap but was priced at $20 per share, right? And instead of the 312 million shares that Strategy has, you'd have 5.8 billion shares, right? You'd have half as many shares from MetaPlanet because it'd be $20 instead of $9.25. By the way, this $9.25 is normalized based on the closing price in yen. Same thing for the closing price in euro, normalized to dollars based on the exchange rate. And then, a much lower share count here for the blockchain group as well, because basically it's, 25% of the shares that they would have outstanding there. But you also see that the starting sats per share doesn't really change, right? Strategy is going to have the most. The number of shares raised, and if I change these numbers back to, be normalized where they're all 5,000, you're going to see that these numbers should basically accrete to be very, very similar to each other in terms of how many shares you're adding. You're adding it to different pies, though, so that's important there as well. So you get different, fully diluted share counts, and then how much Bitcoin you purchase is exactly the same. Sats per fully diluted share that you get, and then sats per share dollar you also get here. And it just kind of shows sort of, that the smaller companies are adding more sats per share dollar if you're putting the same money in. But we may not put the same money in. What happens if strategy does, half of their 80, the 4242 plan this year? Let's take the blockchain group down to $1 billion, so that it's basically by size, everybody's sort of outperforming each other. And you start to see sats per fully diluted share here be a lot closer to each other. You see here where it's based on today's actual share price and share price increases here, that strategy could outperform MetaPlanet. And so there's a lot of factors that go into this. One other one that I still haven't changed yet is looking at the price of Bitcoin. What happens if Bitcoin's 150,000, right? And that's basically the Bitcoin price that we're buying at on average during the 6-month period. And you can see how, if I go back just a second to let this load, we go from 54, 57 to 183 to 32, 39, 127. It makes a meaningful difference, but it also, changes what's down here in various ways. And more so as well, the bigger you get, right? Where you're actually seeing strategy outperform, these other companies in some instances there, because of all of these things working together in various ways. So I still have not cracked the code, I think, is what I'm figuring out here. I do think we have to kind of take into account these basically, sats per share dollar value. If I put $1 into one of these stocks, what am I going to get out of it? What's the yield going to be based on that dollar? All of those types of things. And there's more discussion we're all going to have. But as I've said elsewhere, I may have said this yesterday, we're fighting over which winning lottery ticket is going to win the most money. If Bitcoin does its thing, even if it doesn't, if Bitcoin chops around where we are and even drops from where we are today, we're somewhere near, 105. If these companies continue stacking, there's still a lot that we can see them adding to the number of sats per share. Sorry, I was trying to get that to 21 billion. And it's a lot, right? Sats per dollar that you're getting there, you're still accreting quite a bit. Sats per fully diluted share, it's coming bigger numbers, even if the price of Bitcoin's falling. So these are good investments, in my opinion. That's why I'm invested in all three of these companies and several others here. And so, the analysis here is important as we're trying to think about portfolio allocation, but whether we're right or wrong, the reason this all started for me is somebody was saying, I'm going to get out of strategy and into MetaPlanet. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't really want to sell any of these things. Like, I'll put new money into one over the other based on what I think is going to happen in the short term and the long term. But there's a lot of things that play. And you can also work with these yields and yield multiples, MNAV months to cover, all of these things for longer timeframes. And that's going to change the analysis here as well, in terms of what we might expect from each of these companies if we do, things that are a little bit less aggressive with, the prices and how much we're going to accrete in various ways as we go forward. So this is what I've been kind of thinking about today. This is, what's on my mind. So this is what I put out there for you folks. I will put a link in the show notes to this spreadsheet. If you want to edit the spreadsheet, you'll need to click here and make a copy of your own, and then you can edit it to your heart's content. I also want to mention that none of this is meant to be financial advice. So do your own research, do your own homework here, and check the numbers that I have here for assumptions and everything like that. If you find that any are wrong or missing, or you don't like what I did here, or about my calculations is wrong, please let me know. I'm certainly trying to think about a framework for myself to think about these things, but not put any invalid information out there for anyone else as they're going over these different valuation models and trying to figure out what they want to do as they look at these companies. So with that, I will end this video. Thanks again for your attention. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great day.